Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts, Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. Along with my co-hosts, Barry Harrison, Mike Bohan, and Kenny Ray, I'm Jim Seibert, and I am glad that you joined us today. Coming up here, December, we're end of year time frame, and I'm the OSHA guy, or so they say. I'm just going to hijack today's show, gentlemen. What do you think our trucking companies should be thinking or acting on this time of year that maybe they're not quite sure, that maybe they don't understand, or they might just not be prepared for it?
Jim, I'm telling you, in this industry, in the trucking industry, there's a lot, when it comes to OSHA, there's a lot of things that trucking companies need to be aware of, and they may not be aware of. There's a lot of ins and outs of another regulatory agency that they may not be all that familiar with. But certainly this time of year, there's one thing that they need to be aware of, and I don't see very often, or I see it's a gap maybe. It's something that's missing, are those forms that they're required to fill out, right? That Form 300 and the 300A, that's something that I'm not sure I see a lot of trucking companies doing that, especially towards the end of the year, and filling those forms out and making sure that form is posted correctly during the appropriate time frame. And so I think that's one area that there may be a gap there for some of the folks listening to us.
Maybe I shouldn't ask that question because, you had to choose the one thing that's difficult to address in a classroom, let alone over a podcast here where people are just listening. But, what you're talking about, that's the 1904 recording and reporting of occupation injuries and illnesses. So since it's heavy and since it's a little bit difficult, you guys know me that personally I have to break some things down to the smallest level in order for me to see the big picture. So indulge me, if you will, while I build a 5Ws case here. Who has record-keeping requirements? And I think, Mike, just like you alluded to, I think that sometimes the trucking industry, some folks there, are unsure that they've got those reporting requirements. So for our listeners, I'm going to do a little bit of laying out here, and you tell me if you fit into any of these categories. There's certain NAICS codes, and those codes, they're established by the North American Industry Classification System, all right? Codes that might pertain to our listeners are the 4841. That's general freight trucking. 4842, that's specialized freight trucking. 4884, support activities for road transportation. And then there's the 4889, which is other support activities for transportation. If your code is one of those, you have reporting requirements yearly, every year. If your business is one of those numbers above, but you're on the smaller side, pay special attention to what I'm about to share here. Many, but not all employers must complete the OSHA injury and illness record keeping forms on an ongoing basis. And here's that smaller number. Employers with 10 or fewer employees throughout the previous calendar year do not need to complete these forms. Okay, if you've got 10 or fewer employees, you don't need to complete the forms. Said in another way here, if there are more than 10 employees at any time during that calendar year, the employer may come under the requirement. When counting your employees, you need to include full-time employees, any part-time, any temporary, and seasonal workers. So this exemption, it's based on the employment of the entire company rather than just an individual establishment. So, for example, if a company has two establishments, one with 5 employees and another with 7 employees, the company must fill out the forms for each establishment because the company employment as a whole is greater than 10. So, however, all employees covered by the OSHA Act must report any work-related incidents that result in a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or in loss of an eye. Also, fatalities must be reported to OSHA within 8 hours of its occurrence. Unless, Mike, what's different for truck drivers?
Yeah, if it happens within a construction zone, then it's going to fall under those OSHA guidelines where you're reporting that in. If it's outside of those construction or work zones, whatever you want to call them, that reporting requirement wouldn't be there. But they're still going to list, if it's a fatality, they're still going to list that fatality on their logs. It's just a reporting requirement that they wouldn't be subject to when it falls outside of that work zone or construction zone.
Excellent point there. So getting to the what here, I think it's important before I go any further that we discuss what these reporting forms are. Then we can expand a little bit more on who have the requirements for each form. So that OSHA Form 300, that's a log of work-related injuries and illnesses throughout the year. So it's a compilation of those on a log form throughout the entire year. The OSHA Form 301 is an injury and incident report. That's used per recordable incident. That's got to be filled out within 7 calendar days after you receive information that a work-related injury or illness has occurred. So what's considered an injury or illness? I'm not going to dive into all the nuances. There is the 1904 spells out first aid. It spells out self-care. It spells out the different nuances to how you're supposed to collect this data and what's recordable and what's not. But just on the high level, OSHA defines an injury or illness. It's an abnormal condition or disorder, and it could include cases such as cuts, fractures, sprains, respiratory conditions. So for OSHA record keeping purposes, an injury or an illness can also consist of subjective symptoms such as aches or pains. And it also deals with some exposure things. So that 301, that is per incident. The 300, that's a log compiling the per incident. And then you have the OSHA Form 300A. That is a yearly summary of work-related injuries and illnesses. The 300 and the 301 are maintained ongoing throughout the year as the incidents happen. Recordable injuries and illnesses then must be entered on these forms as they occur. The Form 300A is completed after the end of the year, summarizing the number of recordable cases that occurred. So we've already discussed the 10 or fewer employees. There's additional rules that I think the listeners need to be made aware of because a lot of our listeners are going to fall into these other categories. So back to the who. Establishments with 20 or more employees in certain high hazard industries continue to submit the Form 300A annually. All right. So the information once a year, that's under the Appendix A. Now, staying out of the technical, Appendix A is a list of the NAICS codes, and those 4 NAICS codes that I shared, that's us. That's our listeners. If you fall under that, you're in the Appendix A. So if you have 20 or more employees, you still have to annually submit the 300A form. Establishments with 100 or more employees in the highest hazard industries in Appendix B. Also, those 4 NAICS codes that I shared, they're also in Appendix B. So if you have more than 100 employees in Appendix B, you need to submit the Form 300A annually, the Form 300 log, and the 301 incident report information once a year to OSHA. Okay, so 20 or more employees in the high hazard industry, if you have more than 20 and you fall within those 4 NAICS codes, you are responsible to submit the 300A form annually. If you have more than 100 employees and you fall within those 4, you've got to submit all 3 forms. All right. Establishments with 250 or more, they're not in the designated high hazard industries. They're not required, period, to electronically submit any of those forms to OSHA. So when do we need to submit these forms? The 300A is posted. Now, what does posted mean? Posted means you print out the 300A form, and that gets put in a common traffic area at your facility, at your main establishments, or at every establishment with the numbers for that establishment for the whole company. And it goes from February 1st through April 30th. So the previous year's data gets put and printed out on that 300A form and is placed on a bulletin board in a high traffic area at your facilities from February 1st to April 30th. The 300 and 301 and 300 ACE, they are submitted to OSHA by March 2nd of the following year that's covered. So these users, that's the how. They can get to, they can manually enter it into a web form on OSHA's website. They can upload a CSV file to process single or multiple establishments at the same time. They can use the automated record keeping system that can transmit the data electronically via an application program interface. This is just a lot of information that's there, but I want you to know this OSHA data collection website, it does not supersede any state requirements. Okay, the state may choose, if you have a state OSHA plan, your state may choose to adopt and use the federal program, or they could have their separate. The federal is going to align. You still have to complete this federal, even if your state requires something different. Hopefully your state says, hey, we're just going to use your federal your federal reporting numbers. So some key takeaways here. If you're one of those 4 numbers and you are a trucking company, OSHA reporting pertains to you. It is a requirement. Whether it's if you're 10 or less, you still have to do a 300A form. You still have to post it, but you're not required to submit any of the forms. If you're over that 20, we've already listed it. You've got to do it all. You just don't have to submit that 300 and the 301. Another key takeaway: contact us. Our listeners, hey, we work for you guys. We're glad that you're here. Email us after this, and we can dive into more of. Hey, we can help you narrow down exactly what you are. Many governing agencies have extremely cumbersome websites and processes to submit this data. This ITA website, the injury tracking application that OSHA has, it's very, very fluid. I'm not going to call it seamless, but it is very easy to navigate and input your data. If you're keeping a digital copy of this, it's easy to upload. If you're keeping a paper copy of this and tracking it all year long, it's easier to hand jam it in. So think now, in December, which employee number do I fall in? And subsequently, which forms are required for submittal given that number? And if you haven't been doing it all year long, pull those forms out and start going back through your medical records and making sure that things were reported correctly, things were managed correctly. How are we going to take this lesson today into the next year, even if this is our first time doing it? How are we going to take it into next year and continuing to manage it going forward and submitting these things timely? So I've rambled the whole time here, gents. I've got some information that we're going to put into the link here as far as some OSHA help sheets, some PowerPoints for folks that Maybe they learn better by reading it and seeing these forms, and that they're not that intimidating. I've got OSHA's helpline listed. We're going to put that kind of information in there to really help the folks go and be educated on this. It seems daunting and it seems complicated. It's a straightforward process. Guys, what else is there that you may want to know that I might have moved too fast through, or I didn't expand on enough?
Jim, I want to share one thing. This is Kenny for our listeners. And my three coworkers know I'm the old guy on the team, and I am the least technologically competent person any of y'all have ever been around. I promise. I'm speaking to our listeners now. I'm a dummy when it comes to technology, and the whole team's laughing right now because they know that what I'm saying is true. But I actually helped a trucking company last year with the electronic filing, and what Jim just said is true. It wasn't difficult even for me. And Jim, two things I want to add. I want to reiterate that very important points you made. Number one, those NACE codes. Jim and I actually went back and looked prior to this podcast, and for our listening audience, listen. Unless you are just purely a brokerage, I'm talking about where all you have is an office location. You're not operating any assets at all. A brokerage is the only part of the trucking industry that's actually exempt from these regs. Everything, if you're a trucking company, I promise you, you fit under one of these codes. So everything Jim just talked about applies to you. Unless you are purely a brokerage with no asset operation at all, every bit of this OSHA stuff applies to you. And one last thing. We hope y'all go an entire year with, we hope you go the rest of your career with no OSHA recordable injuries or illnesses. But know this, even if you have a blemish-free year where you don't have anything you have to list on your log, you don't have to prepare any investigative reports, know this, the 300A still must be posted. In fact, it's bragging rights then because you put it up and it shows all zeros. You had no injuries. That has to be posted in a high traffic area of the terminal. So the driver's lounge, the driver's room, somewhere where the drivers come and pick up dispatch orders. If you've got mechanics, posted in the mechanic break room. That has to be posted even if you had no injuries or illnesses. And, you started off this podcast asking Mike, what is the number one thing we see on the trucking side of non-compliance with OSHA? And it is this entire discussion about injury and illness reporting. But specifically for me, and I'm just speaking for me now, but I think Mike would echo this, the number one way that manifests itself is we do not hardly ever see that 300A posted for trucking companies, and they need to understand. I'm trying to put all this together because you did such a good job at describing those NACE codes and then what the requirements were, but they need to understand if you're a trucking company, you need to be posting that OSHA information. You are under the regs.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. Your 3-minute spiel there was my key main points of all of this. You fall under the requirements 100%. Gentlemen, it was great to spend some time with you this morning. To our listeners, thanks for joining us once again. We're so happy that you guys share with others out there that, hey, there's a podcast with 4 country bumpkins that talk real applicable stuff, and they're kind of funny to listen to and talk about their technology woes. So thank you for being a part of our journey as we discuss real world application stuff for our profession. And until next time, we will see you then. Drive safe, and we'll catch you down the road.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.